Hello and welcome to another mining podcast with me, your host, Paul Harris, Columbia Gold Symposium, Mining Journal, and a Kitco correspondent. And joining me as co-host is Joe Mazumdar, editor of Exploration Insights. Joe, what are we doing here? Why are we doing another mining podcast?
Good question, Paul. You asked me, so I'm here. But I think the idea is to we would take some topics related to the mining industry and investing and talk about them for 20 to 30 minutes and maybe do this every month if we can find decent topics to discuss. And I think the important thing is that we're approaching this with an independent, unbiased point of view, that we have no underlying motivation to promote or demote anything. We're coming at it at a level where we think we can add some value, and hopefully, as the listeners or viewers can attest to whether that works or not. So that's what we're trying to do. And what's this the first topic that we're going to initiate on this week or this month, Paul?
Yes, well, as you say, we're looking at diving into things that are relevant in the mining sector at the moment, which may or may not influence investment decisions, things we think are topical. So I think let's start off with political risk. We're both based in the Americas. You're based in Vancouver in Canada. I'm based in Medellin in Colombia. Latin America has seen a number of presidential elections this year, and a lot of activity, should we say, on the country risk front. Lots of changes going on. So maybe this is a good topic to kick off with. In some ways, certain parts of Latin America, Chile and Peru, have been seen as very stable, mining-friendly jurisdictions for, let's say, the past 20 years, while other jurisdictions have been seen as being more risky. And it seems perhaps that that's sort of turning on its head somewhat in the recent months. So I think there's a lot to explore there. Specifically, the recent presidential election in Peru. Let's start with that. What's happening in Peru?
Okay, so Peru, I've been following because within the Exploration Insights portfolio, I had significant exposure to Peru, all the way from exploration to some production. And so the topic of these elections, where a candidate that came from literally and figuratively left field, ended up, like I think right now, he's on the edge of confirming being the next president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, of a party that is definitely left of center, to be kind, and what the implications on the mining industry are going forward, and the investments that we have within the letter. And so this fella came on. Nobody thought that he would, be in the running, let alone a candidate. And he ended up winning the first round, which was, a partition between, I don't know how many candidates, was it 15 or 20? And so he ended up in a battle between, it was sort of like a Clinton-Trump battle in that, Castillo was probably the only person that Keiko Fujimori, who was a right of center candidate, whose father was the ex-president of Peru, could have actually beaten. And potentially this Fujimori was the only person that Castillo could have beaten, because Fujimori comes out of the gates with a very high negative rating. And so there's a lot of people that may have voted for another candidate that didn't like Castillo that decided not to vote for her at all. So the margin of victory was small, but still important. And, they have a new president for the next 5 years, if he lasts that long. But it has implications on the mining industry. And that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, the margin of victory was about 44,000 votes. It was a very polarized election with a clear left candidate against a clear right candidate. And it really talks about points at the fragmentation of the political situation in Peru. As you mentioned, 18 parties in the first round, It really was a divisive election, and it looks like Castillo is going to win it. And he's, I think you were very kind. I mean, he's a Communist Party candidate, Peru Libre, and he's got some very interesting ideas about what he wants to do with his presidency. I mean, one of his main electoral platforms was getting rid of poverty, increasing education, improving access to healthcare, things that pretty much any government, no matter what its political stripe, really sort of cares about. But why is he potentially so divisive, or potentially a threat to mining sector and investment in general?
Well, I would say that, we had a left of center candidate in Peru previously, and people were thinking that he might be like Ollanta Humala, in that he was a left wing candidate. And then when he came into power, he moved closer to the center, and people felt more reassured as he brought in ministers into his cabinet that were people that were fit for the job. And in the end, he understood what the mining industry offered the Peruvian government, or the economy, and did well. I don't think that's the case with Castillo. As you pointed out, the roots are more, far left, and he's supported by people from the Communist Party. And also, we don't know the ministers he's going to be putting in the important positions, and whether they have much experience running, an economy at this scale. And Peru has been doing well over the last probably 5 to 7 years in terms of GDP growth, mostly driven by the mining industry. And it has taken a lot of people out of poverty, that growth. I think COVID-19 has exacerbated the issue between the haves and the have-nots. And that's probably pushed people to elect somebody of this, of this far left, because they probably just want a significant change in the government and more money to come to, the poorer regions outside of Lima. So it's basically the Lima society versus, most of the rest of Peru, potentially more so the Andean regions. And that's where this guy's from. This guy is from the Cajamarca region, from the Andes, a school teacher with, not a lot of formal education, a good background story. But then how does that translate into running a government? And then how does his idea of initially suggesting they nationalize mining, to talking definitely about increasing royalties and taxes, which is not, very distinct from what Chile's doing right now.
It's interesting. He's from Cajamarca, and Cajamarca is a very mining strong province. There's a lot of mines there. And as you say, he wants to increase the government take from mining. So Moody's downgraded Peru, so cost of capital is going to get more expensive. Will this result in a freeze on investment in mining and exploration in Peru, or is it too early to tell until he's really taken office and laid out his ministers and his policies?
So like you said, he was from the province of Cajamarca. Cajamarca has, big mines like Yanacocha. But, during my time with Newmont, I would say we had more blockades and more issues in Cajamarca than we ever had with Coricoyo in Bolivia. Cajamarca has always been a difficult region. And I remember the Cerro Quilich project that we had with Newmont, that was basically taken off of reserves and never built because of local opposition, and also the much larger Conga project, copper gold project, that was supposed to extend the life of that region connected to Yanacocha for Newmont and Buenaventura, that also got taken off reserves because of local opposition. So this local opposition to mining projects because of water issues has been something that is not new in Cajamarca. Cajamarca has been problematic for decades in terms of mining. But if you can find a project that you can build, I mean, the area is very prospective, but you have to deal with the local opposition. And so it's not strange that somebody with an anti-mining stance or position comes from a place like Cajamarca because there is a significant population of people that are against mining in Cajamarca. And then going back to your question is what are the implications right now going forward? And in terms of mining investment in foreign direct investment, I think people will want to see Yanacocha sulfides is a significant project to extend the life of Yanacocha, whereby they would put more capital in to change the processing or such that they can process refractory ore. That's deeper in the high sulfidation epithermal system that is Yanacocha. The question is right now that decision for Newmont, it was a 2021 decision. So that would be a good decision, yay or nay or deferral, to see how mining companies with significant footprints in Peru are handling the change in government. That would be probably one of the big signposts to watch.
Okay, well, Peru, as you hinted at, has done very well in recent years. It's grown its copper production to over 2 million tons a year. It's the second largest copper producer in the world. It's one of the top 3 silver producers, produces other minerals besides. I want to let's bring in a concept that a lot of people are familiar with, the Lassonde curve. Yanacocha sulfides, obviously, it's on the verge of a mining construction decision, so it's way up at the top of the curve. To what extent will the impact depend upon where a project or a company is on that curve?
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good question for anybody in the investing world. Is that right now, if you own shares of a company that's actually producing in Peru, they will be immediately negatively impacted by a change in taxation, a rise in taxes or royalties or both. So in terms of free cash flow, that kind of exposure could be negative. And so, you have companies like Buenaventura or Hochschild or companies like that with, the majority of the exposure in Peru would be negatively impacted on the production side because of, negative impacts on free cash flow, despite, the rise in some of the commodities they produce. Then you go to the development stage, like you're talking about, projects like Yanacocha. That's got to be a decision to see, okay, if we put in the new taxes, the new royalties, or changes in any other kind of fiscal regime, what do the returns look now? Is it still a viable project? That's got to be the questions. But right now, we're just getting Castillo into government, confirming, and then he's got to talk about policy. What are these? How does the rhetoric translate into actual policy? That is going to determine those investment decisions going forward. And there'll always be a market within Peru to invest in mining, but from what I understand, a lot of people have been shipping their money out of Peru, knowing this guy's going to come in. So I'm not sure about the internal investment because, Peru, as you know, has a rich mining history. And a lot of these companies I'm talking about, like the Hochschilds and the Buenaventuras and that's mining families in Peru, from Peru. So they know how to mine. They've been doing it for a while. But are they going to be investing in their projects in Peru or looking to diversify outside of Peru? That's going to be another signpost to watch. And then from the, let's say, advanced exploration stage is that, single asset companies with no cash flow, how do you get financed to continue advancing this project? Because the sentiment on Peru is definitely not positive. So how do you get that extra $10 to $20 million to keep drilling? That's really the problem in the near term. For exploration, grassroots exploration, timeline is much longer. And so you will go through 3 or 4 more presidents potentially in Peru before you actually, even think about going into production. But their issue is more about financing because, again, just like the single asset developer, they do not generate any free cash flow. So where do they get the money to continue doing grassroots? They don't need a lot of it. But where do they continue to get the $2 to $5 million? Do people keep investing in those projects? and that'll be the risk there if you're looking at a grassroots
I
explorer.
think one interesting thing there, just to follow up on your last point, it just in recent weeks, last couple of months, I've seen 3 new silver companies for assets in Peru coming out, and Tier 1 Silver, Palomina, and Manatara Silver. Last year and 12 to 18 months ago, there was a slew of new junior explorers picking up silver projects in Mexico, and it seems now companies are being formed to take projects in Peru. As you say, they've got a sort of 10 or 15 years of exploration ahead of them. It'll be in someone else's administration by the time they get through to sort of advance to permitting or construction decisions. So it seems some in the junior space are perhaps disregarding any potential threat here because the timelines for them to get it to a meaningful point are so far away.
Well, also it does present opportunities. So if people are pulling out of Peru and more ground opens up, and you have more long-term investors, or you're a private company, it might work in your favor to pick up ground right now, because the prospectivity of Peru is, that doesn't change. Geology doesn't change if you change the president. It's still highly prospective. I think in the end, what gets built, what doesn't get built, what you can explore on, what doesn't get explored, that's less federal for me than local. So no matter who is in government, and we've had different parties in government, and Conga was taken off of reserves by Newmont. They don't have it in their business plan anymore. No matter who the government is, Cerro Quilich didn't get built and hasn't been put back into the pipeline. So that's a very local phenomenon, and local phenomenon globally basically is very important. Because if you don't have local, support for the project, the likelihood you'll get into development, reduces quite significantly. So the federal government has that issue, and these are the elections we watch, because they say, okay, what's the fiscal regime? What's the tax stability contract with you? How long will it take to permit? Can I get money out of the country? All these sort of issues are from higher levels of government than municipalities and the local opposition to a potential project. So they can impact investments, but they probably don't have a yay or nay opinion on whether your project gets permitted to development. That has more influence, I believe, locally, and that would continue to do no matter who you have as president.
And that's the case in most mining jurisdictions. And I guess one of the key issues at the moment is the uncertainty. We still don't know if Castillo is going to be president. It's perhaps 90% certain he is, but it hasn't yet been confirmed. And he's far from having a majority in Congress, so it will be difficult for him to advance a very aggressive legislative agenda. And so whilst he's called for tax stability agreements to be renegotiated and perhaps state participation or extreme taxation, I think it's likely that a lot of those measures will be watered down. He's going to have to sort of broker compromise to be able to advance a legislative agenda. And I think we can perhaps see a parallel there with what's happening to the south in Chile. Chile's in the process of, there's a bill advancing through Congress in Chile, which proposes quite a dramatic increase in mining taxes. But that's likely to be sort of watered down and reduced for it to be able to get to the point of approval. How do you see that happening in Chile? And do you think that will be a sort of perhaps a reference for what's going to happen in Peru?
Yeah, potentially. The thing is that a lot of Latin American countries, and being in Colombia, have been significantly negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so their financial situation right now, their balance sheets of a lot of countries are not looking good. And the ones that have, and this is our focus right now, is the mining, the ones that have a significant component of their GDP driven by mining are looking at the mining industry and seeing commodity prices where they are, and potentially the free cash flow is being generated, and saying, hey, how do we get more over here? And so that has looked to, okay, let's get more revenue, tax revenue, royalty revenue from the copper mining industry in Chile, from precious metals and copper mining industry in Peru. The question really is, in the end, it's the allocation of those taxes and royalties, because the taxes and royalties that mining companies they pay to the federal government, some provincially. But then the thing is that how those governments reallocate those funds locally is another issue. But it's not the mining companies; they have no say on that. So even though the local might look at the mining company and see, oh, hey, I'm looking at your balance sheet. You made a lot of money. You generate our free cash flow. Look at how we're living. Why don't we have better schools and blah 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 blah. And sometimes they do, because the companies spend that money over and above what they pay in taxes and royalties. But the problem is that the government's not reallocating this money. And one of the big issues, not so much in Chile, but definitely in Peru, has been corruption. And so you might pay all you want, but then 15 to 20% of that's going in other people's hands and not coming back locally. And so that the ability to allocate capital that's coming in, the revenue that's coming in better, more efficiently to the locals is an important part. And if they can negotiate something between his party and the Congress to do that better, I think that would be a positive all the way around. And that wouldn't even involve changing the taxes or the royalty scheme. It would just mean more efficient reallocation of funds.
Well, I guess that's one of the issues in Peru, is that what you've just mentioned there, the better, more efficient distribution, hasn't really been part of Castillo's discourse. He sees that the rural communities haven't received anything, therefore it must be that because miners aren't paying enough.
And that's because he doesn't understand how the system works or doesn't work. Like when locals, because there's a certain amount of money that's allocated to local communities. But the thing is that they have to ask for it. So they have to sort of fill out, sort of a pseudo authority for expenditure, and then get a budget and say, okay, I want to build a school. Okay, it's going to cost this much. I need this much construction. I need this. This is the labor cost. Those local communities have no clue as to how to actually fill out those forms or get quotes or understand what they need. And so what I've seen is a lot of mining companies help them fill out those forms to get the money that they're due, that is their money, because the central government, ridiculously enough, is worried about corruption locally when the corruption's happening, at a higher level. So they don't want to just give them a blank check or the money that they should get allocated. They want to see, specific funds going to specific projects. But those guys that locally are not administratively set up to actually ask for that money. And so that's an administrative flaw in the whole process that has to be bettered, and some mining companies have tried to improve it.
Yeah, I think going back at least to the Fujimori presidency, every president that's lasted more than 3 days in Peru has finally been succumbed to corruption and been caught with a hand in the till. So it's an endemic problem in Peru that goes right to the highest levels. So that distribution, Castillo does have some valid points there.
Yeah, and I would say, the corruption issue in Peru is not just in Peru. It's obvious. I mean, Chile and potentially Colombia are little, windows of less corruption. But most of Latin American countries have this issue with corruption. The Oberdex scandal, hit Argentina, Brazil, almost every country in Latin America. That construction company that paid off officials for basically signing their contracts. So that's been something that's been endemic throughout. But I think the issue becomes when that corruption has basically exacerbated the gap between the haves and have-nots. So that's been one issue that's exacerbated that gap. And the other one has been, over the last 18 months or so, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, I want to sort of follow up on one of the points you made, as a successful project ultimately depends upon the region you're in, the locality you're in, the relations you have with the communities and the leaders there, and the issues that they see. Water can be a big issue, is often a big issue. We see that in Chile, we see that in the United States, in Canada, pretty much everywhere. Water can be the number one issue for communities. Just to the north of Peru, in Ecuador, that country also had a presidential election this year, and very similar in some ways to Peru's election. You had a right-wing candidate against a left-wing candidate, but in this instance, the right-wing candidate, Guillermo Lasso, won, very pro-business, very pro-mining. And his opponent, Jaco Perez, is very anti-mining, and he's still looking to effectively ban mining in any stage in Ecuador. To what extent do you think the Lasso presidency will be good for investors, or is there still very much a threat from sort of Perez and communities that are really conscious about or worried about protecting water sources?
Well, I think that the issue about water globally is real. I think the issue about tailings is real. I think the issue about acid rock drainage is real. And there will be places, like I said previously, that locally they don't want the project, and I don't think it matters who's in power. It just won't happen. And so if you continue to lobby, continue to spend money, you basically, you're undergoing a Sisyphean task in terms of, you're going to be back at the same spot every year, but, a little bit poorer. So I would say that whoever's in government, it doesn't change those problematic projects, but whoever's in government could make investment more appealing, if they're not raising taxes, not raising royalties, make permitting more transparent with, a timeline that everyone can follow. That makes it easier for explorers, developers, producers to contemplate investing in that country. But whether they say, the tax law is stable now, the permitting scheme looks really good, and now I'm going to go into the spot that the locals just do not want any mining. I don't think that's going to change anything. Those lightning rod projects, the attitude to those projects locally are not going to change. And the Jaco Perez or the Castillos of this world, they're just names, but they do represent a significant amount of those populations in those separate countries that are opposed to mining, and that's not going to change whether they're in power or not in power. Like if Fujimori came in Peru, I don't think Newmont was going to think that Conga would come back online, or Cerro Quilich would come online, or any other problematic project would come online like Tia Maria. So I don't think that changes anything. But it does make the framework of how you invest different. And that's really the question right now. The framework to invest in Peru looks like it's gone negative, and potentially the framework to invest in Ecuador may be more positive. And then if we take another step back, a country that didn't have a president election like Argentina, it's almost a question of, asking for volunteers and everybody stands back and you're the only one there. Argentina is looking better relatively just because they haven't done anything worse recently. Argentina doesn't look as bad right now as Peru and potentially Chile. And I don't think that's going to change.
Ecuador is certainly an interesting one. Shortly after Guillermo Lasso took office, there was a M&A activity when Dundee Precious Metals announced a formal bid to acquire INV Metals for the Loma Larga project. There's a lot of synergies there for Dundee. It's got the processing technology through the Sunib smelter in Namibia to process the arsenic-rich ores there. They say it's a similar mine to Chalopec, which operates in Bulgaria. Ecuador is also drawing a lot of attention, obviously, still through the SolGold project, Cascabel and Alpala deposit, and more recently the Warintza, the drilling results from Warintza achieved by Solaris Resources. It sounds like your message there is it really depends on where you are in the country, what your regional reality is as to whether the project can really go forward or not.
Yeah, and I would say, like, when I was in Ecuador back in the late 90s to 2000, uh, Ecuador has always been prospective. There has been no question about its prospectivity. The issue has always been it's Ecuador. Permitting and doing some things there are just not easy, and water is a big, huge issue there. And it does have a big environmental, anti-mining population. So that's something that you have to deal with, and I don't think it goes away if you elect a more right of center candidate. You make the structural framework of investing in the country better, but you might not change the realities locally.
It's quite something, perhaps, when Argentina seems to have an aspect of sanity about it over and above some of its regional neighbours. But following on your comments about your view of the communities and relationship, a lot of the projects in Argentina, the Andean Cordillera, the Pampa in Argentina, very low populations, so they don't necessarily have the same sort of community issues as in other countries. Obviously, that depends on which provinces you're in, because the minerals are owned by the provinces, they have full autonomy, and if the provincial capital doesn't want mining, such as in Mendoza, you're out of luck. But there are provinces where they're very pro-mining, such as San Juan, for example. So very interesting turn of affairs there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, look, I spent about 8 years in Argentina and around South America, and I would say, like, the provinces like San Juan, Santa Cruz, Salta, Jujuy, very pro mining. But the problem is that when you start getting closer to the border with Chile, then infrastructure becomes an issue, and sometimes it's better to go on the Chileno side. But to get international agreements and that between Chile and Argentina is not the easiest thing to do on someone's bucket list. But to build a mine in Santa Cruz is not such a hassle, or in Salta. But Chubut, another province like Mendoza, that basically anti-mining, even though like a project like Navidad, there's very low density of people there, but the entire non-mining group there is so vociferous and so vocal, let's say, that project had a window where the government supported it, which is closed, and now we might have to wait a while before the window opens again. I mean, definitely that province could use the money, and they could even work out a plan to process the material in Santa Cruz rather than Chubut, and use the cyanide over there if they continue to have a ban on cyanide. So there's ways around it, but the problem is that some of these groups are may not even look at your science based on, hey, we're not going to have a big impact on the water, or hey, cyanide is inert, or hey, we can dispense of this waste, or we can do all these risk mitigating schemes, and we'll spend more money to help it. We'll line our tailings, what have you. These guys won't listen to anything. They just don't want the project. There's just some of these groups, there's just no talking to, and that might be the issue at Navidad. It might be different for Escobar in Guatemala with a new government. Can they, because they want the jobs, they want, people to stay in the country, they want an improvement in the economy. They can point to when Escobar was running, to its impact on the economy. Does that project go forward? Can they turn the tide there? So each project is different. It's nuanced. But some project, I mean, it takes patience with some of these projects to get them on, but some of these, you just got to wonder if it's worth it. Definitely in Mendoza, I mean, I would not go in there thinking that I could develop a project there.
Okay, let's sort of bring the conversation to a close. And I suppose one of the outcomes of all the changing political country risk scenario in Latin America, and perhaps COVID has a lot to do with this as well in terms of the travel restrictions. The M&A that we have seen a lot of that has been in North America, Canadian provinces, Nevada, jurisdictions where operators are more sure of the rules, the taxation regimes, the permitting climate. They know what they're dealing with.
Yeah, so going on about increased taxes. Nevada had an increase in taxes. I mean, it was an increase to fund education, not unlike what Castillo is talking about in Peru. But the impact was actually agreed on by all parties. The education people, the government, the state government, and also the mining industry, because they knew that they would get hit by increased taxes. So they thought, well, this is something we could do. And so that's happened, but Nevada is still, one of the premier mining jurisdictions for gold in the world, and continues to be. What I saw was interesting is that, British Columbia has a lot of low-grade copper porphyries, and, they're low-grade, but, the copper price is now over $4. And the gold price is, it's come down, but it's still 1,700 plus. Whereas most major gold companies are using $1,250 or $1,200 for reserves. So there's still quite a bit of a gap for them. So they're looking at BC more. They're looking at Ontario more, Quebec, a lot more things in Canada. And people, would say, oh, it's tough to permit in BC. But I went through, covering when I was a brokerage analyst, Pretium. And that was very quickly permitted. The important thing is that they had the local First Nations group on side. And that is so important in Canada. It's important globally, but in Canada, it's very important that you have the First Nations groups that your project would directly impact on your side. And that helps with the permitting. That helps keep the NGOs back that might be against all mining projects, and decide, where do I allocate some of my capital to stop a permitting project? If the local First Nations groups are in favor of the project, that's a waste of money for the NGO. They don't want to be seen to be on the other side of the First Nations groups. And so what we see is somebody like Rio Tinto, who have probably the highest global copper budget for exploration globally, spending money, allocating some capital into a low grade, infrastructurally challenged copper project in the Yukon called Casino, when they made a private placement into Western Copper Gold. And then, their issue is not trying to improve the grade or increase the tonnage. Their issue is, okay, does the metallurgy make sense? What's the tailings look like? Have you got all the stakeholders on side? Those sort of questions, as opposed to, geology questions in terms of, is there a high grade over here? Is there more regional exploration we could do? It's more about, here's what you got. We get it. Can we make it any better metallurgically? Can we make the process better and are the locals on side? That's really the questions people are asking. And so BC right now is enjoying a bit of a renaissance because of the higher copper price, but also looking around globally to see what's happening and where can you go.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. So I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. And I'd like to thank Joe for helping me co-host another mining podcast. Join us for the next one as and when we decide on a suitable topic to talk about. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks a lot, Paul.